Hello, it's Scott Manley here, and today I thought I would return to Shenzhen I because, well, I completed the game, or at least I completed the first part of the game back in Christmas last year. It was basically one of my favourite games of the last year, and I loved the presentation, the way the manual was all set up with it to look like actual product specs and whatever, and I loved the fact that it was really hard, devious programming problems along with, you know, power flow and electronics and stuff like that. But the main reason I'm actually playing this today is because my friends over at a website, Chrono, whatever, GG, they are actually selling it super cheap, and so there'll be a link that you can click on and get the game super cheap. Yes, I know this is affiliate fees and all that, but I hadn't looked at this game for so long, and a lot of people said, why did you never complete it? And the truth is, once I got to Avalon City, I hit a brick wall. I mean, for the first set of puzzles, I could solve one in a few minutes. I could solve a lot of these in like 20 minutes. But when I got to Avalon City, this one here, I sat and I looked at this for hours and hours at end. And I kept on building a solution, and then the solution would fail in testing. And, I spent a really long time on this. And I guess I thought it would be cool to share it with you. But this one was the cold storage robot. Basically, you're wanting to, it was great to meet you at the new citizen orientation. The Ocean Bounty Program is an initiative to meet their sustenance using nothing but the sea. So basically, you want to build a robot. So the robot design, which I think is now working, and I haven't actually simulated it 100%, but I think it's going to work. So obviously, I've cut out all the design, which I just don't have enough space on my hard drive. I think this took on and off like 4 hours for me to actually figure out the exact set of operations here. So I'm just going to show you the traces here. Obviously, in a few cases, I could have saved these shunts, these bridges, by running traces underneath the stuff, but we're not that stuck for space. So what's going to happen is the radio receiver is going to get a two element data packet. It's either going to be a 1 to store or a 2 to get. So I take that and then I decide whether to route it either to the store routine or the retrieve routine. And both of these use memory here, so they both immediately send the special signature number down the X0 line. That goes to the memory thing, which goes and looks for the first value that is free and then sends it back along its X3, which is hooked to these X0s. Next, both of these things will ask the robot thing to move to the correct position, but there's actually some sequencing and stuff going on regarding the extending the arm, grabbing with the arm, allowing the motion to happen, and so on and so forth. But in both cases, we figure out how long we need to sleep. You see this in this sequence of operations. And otherwise, they're both very, very similar, just the order of operations isn't quite the same. They're both hooked up to X2, which is a common data bus that goes to one of these DX300. This basically hooks up a couple of pins here, so I either send a 10, a 1, or 11, or 0, and that sends either of these high. The motor, of course, has to go and do a power of 100 to go in one direction, 0 to go in the other, 50 to stay in the middle. So the position is going to depend upon how far it has to move, but yeah, I think I've got everything running here. Look at the robot picking up the thing, gets a signal for 304, store 304, store 591, now grab 304. Isn't that marvelous? Yeah, this one, I was glad to see that this seemed to work. I haven't actually demonstrated it so far. Yes! Oh, that's not bad. My production cost could be a lot lower, but my power usage is pretty low. That means power usage is the number of instructions I execute. Lines of code could probably shrink that down. Looks like somebody's figured out a way to do it with fewer pieces of hardware. But, that wasn't bad for 4 or 5 hours work. I will have to come back to this at some other point. So one of the more interesting, one of the interesting items that appeared on the Steam Workshop was this. This is a crossfader. So crossfader is a simple input connector to a slider. A and B are inputs connected to audio, and you have to mix A and B according to this. Now this is just your average everyday Shenzhen I problem. However, it is designed by Marcus Persson, better known as Notch, creator of Minecraft. Of course, Minecraft itself was a clone of Infiniminer, which was created by Zach that created Shenzhen I. So this is a kind of interesting closing of the circuit. However, the problem itself is really set up to make it actually way harder than you would otherwise expect. You see, the only components I can see that I can fit on the board are these ones here. Like, these can fit on, but they're not very useful because we have 4 analog connections, so you need the 2 analog connectors on here. Now, if I drop the analog connectors in, you'll notice one other issue. First of all, you can't flip these things around, so you kind of have to rely on the orientation. You're going to have to link these to the analog connectors, right? And then somehow you need to run data between them. There's this bit in the middle which stops you transmitting, you know, 2 systems at once. That just has pin type mismatches and things like that. Yeah, it just wouldn't want you to do that, and you can't cross them over using these bridges because the bridges, they simply don't have room. I don't know, maybe I'm not understanding the problem. Incidentally, you can't run bridges over the board like that, and there's no way to rotate these things. So, yeah, I had to come up with an interesting solution, and what I did is I used a common data bus here, right? So the common data bus ran through this X1, connected up to X0, and then very carefully connected through to here. So all the data would be carried by this common bus shared by all these 3 nodes, and then the hard part is synchronizing it. So here's what I did earlier, right? Because obviously I banged my head against this for a while. So like, what have you done for me? So yeah, easy enough. First of all, to note, the fader can be positioned from 100 all the way down to 0. Now, since we're multiplying things, you'll notice that the value is only ever multiples of 10. So the first thing we want to do is divide this value by 10. Of course, there's no divide operator in the Shenzhen I construction instruction set. So what you have to do is, of course, do the digit get for the first digit, which is corresponding to the tens place, but you have to special case 100, so you do a test if that's equal to 100, move that into the accumulator, otherwise you just take this value here. Now, next, of course, is you then need to, what I do then is I write this out to the bus. Now, this is seen by all 3 of these. They all, by the time they get here, they're all waiting on X1, right? They're all waiting on this data bus to go high. And so they all have basically a lot of sleep instructions put in to make sure that they kind of synchronize together. Now, the other thing that happens is that this is then going to send the opposite fader value. So it needs to flip the value around. If it's 100% on one side, it has to be 0 on the other. So you multiply this integer from 0 to 10 by -1, and then add 10, and then you write that to the bus. So the next thing this does is, it's of course, this gets the data, it reads the value from here, it multiplies, sorry, it divides by 10 again using this. I'm going to point out the A and B simple inputs, they never show anything other than they never show 100, right? So we don't have to worry about testing for 100. So yeah, we multiply that then by the value that is pulled off the data bus, so that should be the first one I've written, and then we sleep, making sure that this one gets on the bus, because we want to make sure that this data, this, you know, the opposite value is on the bus before we then write the value that's in our accumulator. You see, we've multiplied this out, so now what we now should have is 2 values on here. We should have the opposite fader position, and immediately followed by that we're going to have the value that is coming from the left channel. So this zips down the bus, gets to here. So this thing has been sleeping. It multiplies the value in the accumulator by the opposite value of the fader. Of course, we've then done this 10 multiplication thing, and then we add in the value from the A channel to the B channel, and that is our mixed value, which of course we then finally echo out to the bus again, and this thing has been sleeping, and finally it is ready to move that value X into P1, and the thing should just run, right? This was nasty because of course it relied on synchronizing code that was running on a common data bus. Now maybe I don't understand the game quite as well as I used to, but I was absolutely fascinated when I saw it. I realized that there wasn't any real public solution for this. I guess I'm not the best person in terms of lines of code, but I seem to have done pretty well in terms of power usage, so I'm quite happy with that. Everybody else that solved it had the same production cost, so I guess I'm on the right track there. So thank you, Notch, for making my day hard. Okay, so one of my favorite designs from the workshop is this really simple one, right? It's redirect A to A and B to B, right? You have a very simple verification signal. The problem is, right, you can't fit, there's no way to fit in the connections. You know, if you run a connection through the middle, right, then there's no way to cross over. You can't cross over here because guess what? You got to go through this section. You can't cross over here because of this little thing here. You can't cross over here. So wiring it the simple way doesn't work. Now, the way you might do that is perhaps by using these little MCE 4000s. You know, what you're doing is you're basically sending the data using the X bus and then popping out the data. So on one side you move the data, incoming data, onto the X bus, and then you move the data on the X bus to there. And this works because you can't read the data you've just pushed onto the X bus. Somebody would have to send it back to you. So this works. It uses a fair amount of power, but it actually solves the problem. The thing is, however, once you complete it this way, you're immediately presented with, oh, people have been able to do this with 0 lines of code, 0 power usage, and even cheaper than what I did. So, I thought about this for some time. I thought about this, and then I started to look at the data, and the one thing that stood out from the data was that the results are basically 0 or 100. So this is pure binary logic, and once I made that realization, I realized that the XOR gate was the way to go. Now the XOR gate is exclusive OR. What you do is you have 2 inputs, right? And we'll just connect this input to output A so we can see what happens. As you advance it through, this has both A and B high, and this goes low, right? And then as soon as A goes low and B goes high, the signal goes high. So what this is saying, right, is when A and B disagree, this will go high. When they agree, it goes low. So what you can then do is take this output signal and then mix it back in with the B and flip it around again, right? This is quite smart. I realize this is how to do it. So you take this and this. So if A and B are different, then you'll get a signal that's high here, right? And then if B, then you mix it with B, and basically this means that you subtract out the value for B, and you end up with a value for A. Similarly, on the other side, we can do this, connect like that, and again connect like that, and I think this should work. So basically, you combine the two together here, and then you subtract out the relevant one and leave the one from the opposite side. That's what the math does. That's what the binary math does. And it's like, I've just ruined this puzzle for everyone because I looked at this puzzle for maybe like half an hour trying to figure out what it was, and as soon as I realized it was binary, I knew I was on to the right answer. So there we go. Best cost 3. Instruction, power usage 0. Lines of code 0. Thank you. Now the final workshop item I want to share with you is, well, this is a ray gun, right? Now the interesting part about the ray gun is that you pull the trigger and then one cycle later the ray actually activates, and the heatsink has also got to be managed, right? So there's a bit of interesting stuff going on there, but I did it with 2 units, and then I noticed, wow, people have managed a much cheaper production cost. How do I assault this problem? So I set myself trying to figure this out. Now look, the first thing I realize is that I've got 3 analog inputs and outputs, right? So a single MC400 or MC6000 won't work for it, but one way, of course, to do analog to digital signal conversion is the DX300, right? So we can stick that in somewhere. So if I can get rid of one of these and then find a way to lay this whole thing out, I should be able to use the DX300 to convert the trigger to an X-bus input, which means I can, save power. Now it's a question of just figuring out where to lay it out, because the DX300 is not a small unit here, right? I could shunt this over the top though. Gotta make sure that we are able to run the X-bus from somewhere. So the trigger is analog, can't feed directly into the X0, so you need to convert it from an analog to an X-bus signal, and you do that with the DX300, as I said. And the only place that makes sense to fit it is inside the hilt here, the handle, whatever you call it. It's not the hilt. That would make it a sword. This is not a laser sword. So look, we've got that. We need to cook that up. Now the next question is the logic. So we have to be able to store the temperature value between cycles. That's important. And but we also need to store the time between pulling the trigger and one cycle out. So I don't have a place to store that, so maybe I need to upgrade to an MC6000, but somebody else did it without that, so there must be a way. Now maybe I can encode it into the temperature thing. Maybe I can add 100, and then when I see it's over 100, subtract 100 afterwards. Or I could do that. See, I'm pretty sure the value of the temperature never needs to go over 100, so assuming I can do that, I can make that happen. Then again, actually, now I think about it, I can store... One thing that does store between sleep cycles is the logic state, right? So the logic state is if you've done a logic test that is preserved. So you know what happens. I'm going to test if x0 is greater than 0. Yeah, sure, if it's greater than 0. And then I'm just going to sleep. I'm going to sleep for a cycle. So that way what we've done is we've stored the result of the greater than test. And if it's, let me see, if it's greater than 0, then we want to assume the trigger is being pulled. So we're now on the next cycle, so we need to move, add 10 to the accumulator, and then we need to move the value 20 to the ray emitter, because you're supposed to do a 20 kilojoule thing. Now on the other side, we need to decrement, if the trigger isn't being pulled, we need to decrement the temperature by 2, but we also need to make sure we need to move 0 to the ray thing as well. But before we decrease it, if the value is if the value is close to 0, then we can't do the decrease. So finally we move our accumulator off to our heatsink, and it works. You see, beautiful. Some of these designs are just like straight up beauty here. I like messing around in the workshop stuff because they tend to be a lot easier than the actual Avalon City problems. But yeah, Shenzhen I, a game which after a year I'm still hugely in love with. I still have so much respect for this game, and yes, it is available super cheap, totally worth your money if you see it. I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.